Somewhere along the Kuwaiti coastline, in a stretch of desert that most people could never point to on a map, American soldiers are standing watch tonight, bracing for something that, until recently, would have sounded almost unthinkable. Not another drone, not another missile. Ground troops. An actual incursion on foot, aimed at seizing the very bases those soldiers are standing on. And whether or not that invasion ever actually crosses the border, the fact that it's being discussed openly by Iranian analysts, by former Iranian officials, in the middle of the most dangerous stretch of this entire war, tells you exactly how far things have escalated. Because right now, in the Persian Gulf, the United States and Iran are not sliding toward a wider war. They are already in one. And what the American military has unleashed in response over the past 10 days is unlike anything we've seen since this conflict first exploded back in February. Let's set the scene properly, because context is everything here. This war began on the 28th of February this year, when the United States and Israel launched a massive coordinated assault on Iranian military, nuclear, and government infrastructure. Iran responded immediately, striking American and allied positions across the region, including in Kuwait, where retaliatory attacks killed American service members within the opening days of the conflict. For months, this played out as a brutal, grinding exchange, strikes and counterstrikes, punctuated briefly by a ceasefire negotiated in the spring. That ceasefire, like every fragile peace in this war, did not last. By July, it had completely unraveled, and both sides were back to trading blows nightly, with Kuwait sitting directly in the crossfire the entire time. And that's the part people outside the region don't always grasp. Kuwait isn't a bystander in this war. It's a battlefield. Iranian forces have repeatedly struck American installations sitting on Kuwaiti soil, bases like Camp Arifian, Camp Buering, and Ali al-Salam Air Base, facilities that host thousands of American troops as part of the broader U.S. military presence across the Gulf. Kuwait's own airport has been hit multiple times, its terminals damaged, its air traffic control infrastructure targeted directly. Just this past week, an oil facility in Kuwait's Ahmadi Governorate was struck, sending a plume of smoke into the sky that was captured by satellite imagery from space. A power generation and water desalination plant was hit and caught fire. These aren't isolated incidents. This is a sustained campaign of strikes against a country that isn't even the primary combatant in this war. A country that simply happens to host the American forces Iran is trying to hit. Now here's where the story takes its sharpest turn. In the middle of all of this, in the last several days, a claim started circulating that has sent a fresh jolt of alarm through the region. Reports, sourced to a prominent Iranian journalist and a former Iranian foreign minister, suggested that Tehran is seriously weighing something far beyond missiles and drones, an actual ground incursion into Kuwait, aimed specifically at capturing American military bases, and, according to these claims, taking American troops hostage. The bases named specifically in these reports were Camp Buering, and either Camp Arifjan or Ali al-Salam Air Base, the exact same facilities that have already been absorbing Iranian drone and missile strikes for months. Now, I want to be straight with you about what this actually is and isn't, because that distinction matters enormously. This is not a confirmed Iranian government order. There has been no verified movement of Iranian ground forces, no amphibious assault force spotted crossing the northern Gulf, nothing that intelligence analysts would classify as an operational military buildup. What we have is rhetoric, serious rhetoric from people with real connections inside the Iranian political and military establishment, but rhetoric nonetheless. Analysts tracking this closely have made the assessment explicit if Iranian ground, naval, or helicopter assets actually begin moving toward the Gulf. That's the signal this threat has shifted from talk to reality. Until then, the working theory among people who study this conflict for a living is that this is deterrence and psychological pressure, a message aimed at Washington as much as any battlefield plan. But here's why even a threat like this can't simply be waved away. This is not the first time Iran has crossed a physical line into Kuwaiti territory during this war. Back in May, during what was supposed to be an active ceasefire, Kuwaiti forces intercepted a team of Iranian Revolutionary Guard operatives attempting to infiltrate Bubiyan Island, a sensitive port zone near the Iraqi border. 6 IRGC troops arrived by fishing boat, tried to slip onto the island undetected, and were met by Kuwaiti forces in a firefight that left 1 Kuwaiti soldier wounded. 4 of the Iranian operatives were captured. 2 escaped. That is a documented, on-the-record incident, not speculation, and it happened during a period when the world assumed the guns had gone quiet. If Iran was willing to send an infiltration team onto Kuwaiti soil once already, during a ceasefire, the idea of a larger operation during active, full-blown hostilities becomes a lot less far-fetched. And the language coming out of Tehran in just the past few days has not exactly been calming. An advisor to Iran's supreme leader posted a warning stating plainly that if the United States continues its campaign for another 2 to 3 days, Iran would move into what he described as a stage of full-scale invasion and annihilation, adding that no political border would provide security against what he called Iran's offensive forces. An Iranian army spokesperson went even further on state television, declaring that if America occupies Iranian territory, Iran would bomb its own land rather than allow it, calling that simply the logic of war. These are not the words of a government looking for an off-ramp. These are the words of a government signaling that it sees this conflict entering a fundamentally more dangerous phase, one where the usual rules, usual restraint, and usual boundaries may no longer apply. So how has the United States actually responded to all of this? This is where the second half of that headline comes in, because what the American military has unleashed over the past 10 days has been relentless. As of the most recent reporting, U.S. Central Command has now conducted 10 consecutive nights of strikes against Iranian targets, an operational tempo that, even by the standards of this already brutal war, stands out. These aren't symbolic pinpricks. CENTCOM has described hitting Iranian command centers, air defense systems, coastal defenses, missile and drone launch sites, underground weapon storage facilities, and naval assets, using a combination of fighter aircraft, drones, and warships. On a single night earlier this month, the U.S. reported striking 90 separate Iranian military targets along the country's coastline in one coordinated operation. Alongside the air campaign, the United States has reinstated and is now, in its own words, fully enforcing a naval blockade against Iranian ports, specifically aimed at choking off Iran's ability to threaten commercial shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. Just this week, CENTCOM reported redirecting 6 commercial vessels and disabling another ship to maintain what it called full compliance with that blockade. More than 50,000 American service members are currently operating across the broader Middle East theater as part of this campaign, a scale of deployment that underscores just how far this has moved beyond a limited, contained conflict. And this war has not been without American losses. CENTCOM has confirmed multiple service member casualties in recent days, including soldiers killed in an Iranian attack on a base in Jordan, part of a broader pattern of Iranian retaliatory strikes hitting American positions across several countries simultaneously. Not just Kuwait, but Jordan, Bahrain, and Qatar as well. The Pentagon has publicly identified those killed. Iran, for its part, has claimed responsibility for strikes on U.S. bases in Kuwait using drones, targeting communication systems, fuel tanks, air defense systems, and ammunition depots, describing these attacks explicitly as retaliation for what it calls repeated American aggression. Kuwait's own government has been placed in an almost impossible position throughout all of this, caught physically between a superpower using its territory as a staging ground, and a neighboring state determined to strike that staging ground no matter the cost to Kuwaiti civilians. Qatar has publicly condemned the strikes on Kuwait as a blatant violation of its sovereignty, warning that continued attacks on Kuwaiti soil could actively undermine any remaining chance of ending this war diplomatically. Kuwait's military has had to repeatedly reassure its own population, issuing statements clarifying that explosions residents here are the result of its own air defense systems intercepting incoming threats, not new attacks landing. A small but telling detail about just how normalized the sound of war has become for ordinary Kuwaitis in recent weeks. Financial markets have felt every one of these escalations almost in real time. When Iran struck 2 tankers in the Strait of Hormuz and hit U.S.-linked facilities in Kuwait, global oil prices spiked nearly 10% in a single day, the sharpest single-day jump in over 6 years. The United States pulled non-emergency personnel out of its embassy and consulate in the UAE entirely. These aren't abstract diplomatic gestures. When a government starts evacuating its own consular staff and canceling appointments, that's a direct signal of how seriously it's assessing the risk of the situation spiraling further. So, where does this actually leave things right now? You have an American military campaign that has now run for 10 consecutive nights without pause, targeting Iranian military infrastructure specifically to prevent further attacks on shipping and on regional bases. You have Iran, battered by that sustained campaign, responding not just with more of the same drone and missile attacks it's used for months, but with rhetoric from figures close to its own supreme leader explicitly raising the specter of full-scale invasion. You have a documented history of Iranian forces already crossing into Kuwaiti territory once this year during what was supposed to be a ceasefire. And you have a small Gulf nation, Kuwait, absorbing strike after strike on its airports, its oil facilities, its power infrastructure, simply because of what sits on its land. None of this guarantees that Iranian troops actually cross into Kuwait on the ground. Analysts who study this conflict closely are clear that, as of right now, this remains rhetoric and pressure rather than a confirmed operational plan. But wars like this one have already proven, repeatedly over the past 5 months, that they can escalate far faster than anyone predicts. A ceasefire that took weeks to negotiate collapsed within a month. A single infiltration attempt on an island most people had never heard of turned into a documented firefight. 10 consecutive nights of American strikes have become the new normal in a war that started with the promise of major combat operations and has since evolved into something with no clear end in sight. What happens next depends on decisions being made right now in Tehran and in Washington by people watching the exact same signals you just heard laid out. If Iranian ground, naval, or helicopter assets actually begin moving toward the Gulf in the coming days, that will mark the moment this shifts from a threat into something the entire world will be forced to reckon with immediately. Until then, I watch Kuwait closely, watch the Strait of Hormuz, and watch how many more consecutive nights of strikes it takes before one side or the other decides talk is no longer enough.